Okay, Volker, thank you so much. What a pleasure. I lost track. It's the third time. Oh my God, third time in this seminar round. It's well, I couldn't imagine a better environment, a better group to present for the third time, and hopefully for the many times to come in the future. As you already said, the findings that I'll be presenting today are some of them are brand new in the sense that brand new that I hope not, but it might be that there are some hiccups in my slides because some of the findings just really came in yesterday actually because part of the work that I'll be presenting is actually based on 3 papers from our group. Part of this is currently not yet submitted to a journal. One of them is going to be published next week probably, so you'll hear more about this if you stay tuned on social media or follow our institute on my account. One is under review and the other one is going to be submitted to a journal soon. But I'll talk more about these individual aspects once I get to the individual papers. Before we head there, I though have a question to you because as the title suggests, and for those of you who know our research, I will be talking about technology, I will be talking about labor markets, and I'll be talking about skills. And I'd like to start as a warm-up, and you can use the emojis. I think you probably all know where to find them, for a question. So I assume, maybe not, but I assume everybody in the room here virtually is old enough to remember the financial crisis of 2008. Big financial crisis, Lehman, investment banks, Lehman Brothers failed. Big economic turmoil, probably the largest economic turmoil we've seen in a while. And thinking about that time back then, the labor markets took a big hit. And to measure the healthiness of a labor market, there are many metrics. 2 of them are essential. That's the unemployment rate and the vacancy rate. So how many people are unemployed, do not have a job, and how many firms are looking for talent and they can't find talent? My question to you is, compared to the pre-period, to 2008, before the pandemic hit, sorry, not the pandemic, of course, before the financial crisis hit, my question is, are we facing higher in the EU? Are we facing higher unemployment rates right now, or are we facing higher vacancy rates right now? Please give me a heart for the unemployment and a thumbs up for higher vacancy rates. Which of the 2 is it? So I see one thumbs up. Higher vacancy rates. Higher vacancy rates. What about employment? No higher employment. So far people tend to say that vacancy rates are higher than before the financial crisis in 2008. Yeah, and oh yeah, okay. So we have one heart, but still, I would guess like if I had to calculate the average of all of these folks, it's rather the vacancy rates that have been going up, and that's actually true. If we look at the Beveridge curve, which is a commonplace for economists, for labor economists to look at, we see that compared to 2008 on the horizontal line, we see that unemployment has been growing. Of course, after the financial crisis, a lot of people lost their jobs, and then unemployment is going back. But we've seen a different trend happening at the same time, and that is vacancy rates been going up. And vacancy rates today, 2000, or at least in the last year, 2024, are significantly higher in the European Union, and that accounts for many other economies around the world than they had been at the time before the financial crisis. And this pretty neatly summarizes that there's something weird going on the labor market, and something that is summarized often as the so-called skill gap or skill mismatch. And that is essentially that while we have kind of a paradoxical situation, we have people on the labor market who might have difficulties finding a job because they feel that their skill set is not up to date. And at the same time, we have firms that are desperately looking for talent because they do not find people that are adequately skilled for the positions that they have currently open. And the latter seems to be the bigger trend, or the more prevailing trend, at least right now. And interestingly, if you think about this, this is also kind of counterintuitive when we look at the narrative, the dystopian narratives around the automation of work, because in this time period, over these years from 2008 to 24, we've seen major shifts in technologies such as machine learning or generative artificial intelligence that were actually supposed to shift the curve to the right-hand side, right? That were actually supposed, at least in these dystopian ideas of the future, to automate work away and make more and more people unemployed. But quite the contrary seems to be the case. And with this puzzling and interesting finding, which is still, bad news for the labor market, it's not great to have that many vacancy rates. We started our investigation in the SkillScale group at the OII. And for some of these domains in the labor market, it is particularly severe. 63% of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the European Union, for example, report that they have severe, so more than half of them have severe difficulties in finding talent in the field of information communication and telecommunication. And this is the backbone of the economy. This is not big companies, this is small and medium-sized enterprises. And this kind of puzzling mismatch, this kind of spike in vacancy rates, despite dystopian outcomes of mass unemployment due to technology, led to the emergence of our SkillScale group. And I'm happy to present three distinct papers here very shortly, hopefully with a bit of a time for discussion afterwards. Just to give you some numbers on the skill gap. So this skill gap, this mismatch between the skills that people have looking for work and the skills that companies are looking for, disrupts workers, it disrupts firms, it disrupts economies and entire societies, if you want to take it that far. For example, 13 million people in the UK report that they lack essential digital skills to master their everyday work, but also their lives in general. On a global level, the World Economic Forum has estimated that to the end of this decade, it could make global GDP suffer by 1.5 trillion US dollars, this skill gap. So the mismatch of workers with lacking adequate skills and firms not finding adequate talent. Just to give you a comparison, estimates looking back at the financial crisis that I mentioned earlier are ranging in the ballpark around 1.2 trillion US dollars. So this skill gap is causing an economic harm until the end of the decade, if you trust these forecasts, that is even higher than the economic loss of the financial crisis, which we all know were really tremendous. And last but not least, in society, if we look at the Pew surveys in the United States, we see that 70% of the people who are worried that their skill set is not up to date, that they can't catch up with the labor market right now, are actually people who voted for rather politically extreme opinions, voted for candidates like Donald Trump, for example. And we know that the skill gap is particularly severe in some roles, and two of the roles we'd like to outline in our first paper, and those are the roles that are centered around artificial intelligence. So firms asking for talent to work with new AI technologies, and in sustainability. So the advancements in farming, but more importantly probably in restoration, in finding new energy resources, in waste management and recycling, and all sorts of these fields. And we've been wondering in our first work, which we call Skills or Degree, to what extent does this impact the relationship of skills and formal degrees? Let me try to elaborate why we think of skills and formal degrees, or why we think of them as interchangeable substitutes here. So we wondered whether this very tight labor market, where firms are desperately looking for talent, specifically in these two domains, in AI and in green roles, whether this has led to a practice called so-called skill-based hiring. And that is, in our hypothesis at least, that skills are becoming more and more important on the labor market, and that because employers can no longer afford to focus on formal degrees, on somebody with a master's or PhD degree, because people don't have master's and PhD degrees in great numbers for working with AI or greening the economy, for example, they are looking rather on skills than on formal education requirements, and they're also rewarding skills more than formal educational requirements. And we did this analysis that I'm going to present to you here only briefly, though of course follow-up questions are encouraged after the talk, is based on roughly speaking 10 million job vacancies from the United Kingdom. And the first thing that we see here on the left-hand side is that both for green skills, so for green roles, and for AI roles. So just to clarify, whenever I speak of roles, we're talking about a labor market vacancy that's demanding at least one of a skill related to artificial intelligence or green jobs. We've seen a tremendous rise for both of them. We see kind of a little dip towards the end of 2022 in the UK for AI roles, and this has to do with a rather big layoff in software. Though once we normalize for industries, that's the dotted line, we see that the dip is not that severe and it's clearly catching up. But we see a tremendous rise, continuous rise for the demand for AI roles in the UK economy. And even though the levels are relatively low still, I mean, we're looking at 1.5 to 1% starting there and going up to around 2% of all job vacancies in the UK, we see that the growth rate is tremendous. And interestingly, on the right-hand side, we see that these roles are not only growing significantly in demand, we also see that they seem to be more skill intensive, which is already a first indication to one of our hypotheses, is that while the average job posting, considering the same length, requires around 5 skills, demanding around five individual skills, we see that the demand for these skills doubles for green roles and is even 3 times higher for AI roles. So it seems to be much more focused on skills when people are looking for talent in these specific fields. And interestingly, this kind of corresponds also with the salary. We see extremely, on the bottom right, we see significantly higher salary for AI roles and roles in machine learning, for example, than compared to the average job offer in the United Kingdom. And also a rising trend, I mean, not as significant as for AI roles, but a rising trend for green roles as well. But what about our hypothesis on skill-based hiring? Well, the idea is, first of all, for skill-based hiring, not only that skills elevate in importance, so that skills become more important for employers, but also that education becomes less important. And what we see on the left-hand side is the development of the mentioning of higher formal education degrees. So the HNC and HND, those are short-term degrees that people could do right after high school, respectively. And then we have bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. And while AI roles on average demand a relatively high, have a relatively high share in demanding those formal degrees, above every third. So every third AI role demands formal degrees. The prevalence of these degrees has been diminishing, as you can see on the very left-hand side over the last years, and it's significantly lower for green roles. Interestingly, also more vocational training is more required for green roles, so the orange bars, compared to higher levels of education. But the picture gets really interesting once we start calculating what wage premium these degrees have. So in a nutshell, what we do is we try to explain the offered wages in these job postings. So like, okay, how can these wages be explained? They're often explained by factors like, where is this position going to be? Is it going to be in a big city, in London, for example, or somewhere in a more rural area? Which industry is it in? Which kind of seniority level is being required from this person? Which kind of occupation are we talking about? And we control for all of these things. And then we look at the role of education. And here something really interesting happened. On the very right-hand side, we see a very beautiful educational gradient. And that is essentially the premium for having a certain degree. You earn more, or you're offered more money with a vocational training, you offered even more money with a master's degree, and you offer a significant premium on the very right-hand side with a PhD degree. The interesting thing is, for green roles, this curve has entirely flattened. There is still a premium after all for degrees. You see all these bars are above 0, but there's no big difference between a bachelor's, a master's, or PhD degree. And more interestingly, once you look to the very left-hand side, for AI roles, this premium has entirely disappeared. When you look at AI roles exclusively, there's no significant premiums for higher, but for a slight premium for master's degrees maybe. But there's, you could argue, no significant premium when controlling for these other factors for a PhD degree or for a bachelor's or vocational training. So we see that the monetary premium of degrees has entirely disappeared for AI roles and flattened for green roles. And why is that? It's because of growing demand. So what we looked at is occupations over those 5 years. So every dot that you see here is an occupation. And we looked at how did this premium for education change? That's the very right-hand side. And how does this premium look like for skills? That's the very left-hand side. So on the right-hand side, the two right-hand side charts, we see that the more an occupation is demanding certain roles, is demanding AI roles, or is demanding green roles, the less actually a degree matters. So there's a really flat line, essentially. There's no correlation between the demand for certain types of skills, AI skills, green skills, or an educational premium. Though on the very left-hand side, we see the premium for skills. And here we see a completely different picture. For example, the chart C1 on the very, very left-hand side, we see that the more an occupation in a specific year is demanding AI roles, is demanding certain skills centered around artificial intelligence, the higher this premium also is. And we ran a couple of regression analysis on this, and the findings essentially are pretty robust. And they come to one conclusion. The more an occupation is demanding, employers are demanding certain skills, such as AI skills, for example, the more we see that the premium for these skills is also rising. So in that sense, the tighter the market has become for certain occupations, the more valuable skills have become, though we don't see the same thing for formal degrees. Formal degrees have really flattened out and show that at least right now, as we look at the labor market for AI and green roles, we do see significant trends in skill-based hiring. This is one part of the picture, how to look at how employers are trying to attract talent. In a second work, we wanted to virtually, hence the name of the paper, look beyond salary. So we wanted to know, okay, so if the labor market is really that tight, if it's really that difficult for employers to find talent centered around working with artificial intelligence, maybe they're going for more than just salary. And literature suggests that in cases where labor market has been tight in the past, it's not only that employers are offering higher salary for these positions, so to attract this talent, to sift through this thin talent pool, they're offering also higher non-monetary rewards. Let me try to tell you, or try to illustrate what we mean with this. So what we're assuming is that for AI roles, and here we look at the United States, by the way, the US labor market, we assume that for AI roles, employers are offering more perks. And these perks are, I'll explain them in a bit to you, are centered around things that are really valuable to employees. So parental leave, for example, a better workplace culture, tuition, paying for the tuition, which is obviously very important in the United States because tuitions are relatively high compared to Europe, and all sorts of other things that I'll show you in a bit. We also think that they do so in addition to high salary. So we think it's kind of a rich, it's a kind of a rich get richer in this sense. So it's for positions where salaries are already high, employers are facing kind of a bottleneck because they can't offer higher salaries, or maybe employees might not respond to higher salaries, so they have to offer something more. And again, similar to the first paper, we assume that that this kind of perk-based, attraction of employees, or the attempts to attract employees with non-monetary benefits, is most distinct in occupations where the demand is highest. So what are we looking at here? We categorized the perks that we could identify in online job vacancies, roughly speaking, in 6 categories. We experimented with a couple of more categories, but those were the most stable one, just to give you this put this very, very shortly. So what we're looking at is whether an employer over this time period has been offering tuition assistance, paid leave, so that people can take extra leave, which is obviously, or as you might know, not as generous in the United States often as it is, for example, in Europe. Health and well-being, so whether the employer pays, for example, for your dental insurance or regular checkups. Parental leave, which is probably an obvious perk. Workplace culture, and this means, inclusivity programs, and to what extent, your workplace environment has certain perks, such as a gym, for example. And also, very interestingly, remote work, because as we know, since the pandemic, remote work has become quite of a perk for many, many people in the labor market, because people really enjoyed the flexibility that they gained during the pandemic when working from home or from places other than the factory, other than the office. And what we already see is here the comparison between AI roles and non-AI roles. Again, an AI role is an job offer wherever any type of AI skill had been required. And these could be really all sorts of types of AI skills. So this could range from prompt engineering and working with ChatGPT up to a machine learning position where people are being asked to design neural networks, for example, the backbone of technologies like generative artificial intelligence. What we see is there seems to be a pattern in the sense that some of these perks are more prevalent in AI roles than in non-AI roles. Interestingly, also, there is a difference between the prevalence of these perks to begin with. So for example, while remote work is a perk that's relatively frequent, parental leave is less frequent overall. But we do see differences between AI roles and non-AI roles. And I think they're very nicely illustrated on the right-hand side picture, where we can see the change over time. So again, what we read here in this line chart is the difference between how prevalent is it to receive or been offered such a perk for a non-AI role, so essentially for the rest of the labor market, compared to AI roles. And everything that's above the dotted line means it is more likely for an AI role to offer a certain perk than for a non-AI role. And we see that things have changed over time quite significantly. Let me just illustrate this with a few examples. We again see level differences, but for example, we see very, very strong trends for workplace culture and for remote work. This is the orange and the purple line, where we reach differences of 15 up to 20% in our last observation periods in 2024. So we see that it is significantly more likely for an AI role to also offer perks such as remote work, which of course we all know is very relevant for knowledge workers, compared to any other non-AI related position in the labor market. Of course, we've been also trying to test this more thoroughly, and we ran a couple of regression models. I'm not going to get into the details unless you'd like me to after this talk, maybe. But what I'm showing you here is essentially the outcome, the final outcome that matters of these regression models. What we see on the left-hand side is, again, those perks, those 6 groups of perks. And we ran various models where we just looked at a baseline model. Essentially, we just replicated the graphs that we've seen before. Then we added individual controls, and these are a lot of controls, actually. So we control for which occupation this posting is in, whether this occupation is a white-collar job or blue-collar job, whether this work is with an S&P 500 company or rather a small business, whether it's located in a city or not, which year we're looking at, essentially, and the educational requirements for these positions. And still, what we see is that for the categories that we noticed earlier, which is namely parental leave, workplace culture, and remote work, the coefficients become slightly smaller, even once we control for salary in our final model, but they're still significant. So even when controlling for all of these characteristics that could influence why a certain perk has been offered, we see that they are still significant for the categories that I mentioned. Where do we go from here? I mean, we also added a different layer where we looked at salary information, for example, and we just wanted to know, okay, is this something that's been added on top of salary, or is this something that is given in exchange to salary? And here the findings are mixed. I'd like to show one finding though, and that's the finding of parental leave. So bear with me when explaining this chart, which might be a bit complicated at first sight, but it's very insightful if you have a closer look at it. So what we see on the left-hand side is essentially the wage development for all jobs in our sample. The gray lines are showing you essentially the wage development for non-AI roles. And not surprisingly, the wages for these non-AI roles are lower than for the colored lines, which are the AI roles. But then we made a different distinction, and that is the dotted line and the solid line. The solid line means those are all roles that offer a perk. So the gray solid line essentially means that this is a role where no AI skills are being required and parental leave is being offered. And we see a slight change over time, kind of a slight divergence, that the wages for these roles are also getting higher than for the non-AI roles that do not offer any perk. So there seems to be a bit of a distinction in the sense that those are probably within the roles that are not related to artificial intelligence. Those are the more privileged roles. They offer slightly higher salary, and they also offer the perk in addition. But interestingly, for artificial intelligence roles, and those are the 2 colored lines, we see a tremendous increase in wages, first of all. So first of all, the colored lines are significantly rising, significantly faster than the gray lines. So the wage premium for AI roles overall have been increasing significantly over time. But what we see in the last years is that here as well, there seems to be a divergence. There seems to be a gap opening up between the AI roles that offer parental leave and the AI roles that do not offer parental leave. Because now, in our last observation period, we see a significant difference of actually like a bit more than 10K per year of the roles that offer parental leave compared to the roles that do not offer parental leave. And this suggests that, at least for perk like a parental leave, it really seems to be something that's offered in addition to money. So those are already the high-paying roles. And on top of that, they also offer a perk like parental leave. And these are similar findings that we see for other roles. Workplace culture, for example, is a big example. So here we also see that those are relatively high paid positions, and on top of this, they're also those AI positions, they're also offering perks such as a gym, for example, or various recreational programs that a company could offer. We've been running this through a couple of regression models as well, and similar to our skill-based hiring model, we see that these trends that I just outlined to you are most pronounced in occupations where the market is really tight. So they are most pronounced in occupations and years where the demand for AI has been growing significantly, much stronger than in other occupations, for example. So being mindful of our time, the most I will probably talk about this last work, which is also kind of the most recent work, but maybe also for some of you the most interesting one. Because now for this last piece, I'd like to move away from looking at AI skills and how AI skills are essentially becoming more valuable, or both in monetary and in non-monetary terms. But I'd rather like to look at something that we probably have all encountered. So when we think about modern AI technologies, something like ChatGPT, large language models, or generative artificial intelligence, we kind of all had our, I assume we all had our aha moment. Let me try to elaborate what I mean with this. So my aha moment with this technology was, you often hear in the news, in the press, that these technologies are, people always say things like they're extremely capable. They're extremely capable. They will substitute human work. We have to fear for our jobs. They will change the way we work like nothing else before. And it's tempting to think that those are all exaggerations. I thought so as well until I worked, and that was a bit more than a year ago, for the first time worked with large language models to prepare some of my scripts for my students. So one of the lectures that I give is on computational methods, and it's one of the classes is essentially teaching students how to build a web scrape. So this is a technology where you can extract information from the internet, from, let's say, the BBC sports page, and summarize this very nicely in a time series. And the students are supposed to learn how to do these basic web scraping techniques. And what I did, and I hope if my admin colleagues from the OII program leads are listening right now, they forgive me. But what I did is, I of course asked large language models to do the job, right? To write me a script in Python, the programming language that my students are supposed to use, for scraping the BBC webpage. And it did so in no time. It was absolutely astonishing. I'd be a fool to say that I could compete with this technology in writing web scripts. Absolutely no chance. And now you can think like, okay, great. So they're right. Bad news. My job will be automated away, probably rather sooner than later, and I could go home and probably, I don't know, need to ask my government for basic universal income or something like that. But I think quite the contrary is going to happen, because what I assume, or what research and literature assumes, is that to some extent, of course, this technology is going to substitute tasks that we have been doing in our jobs. But teaching my students how to web scrape, teaching them how to write code, is only really one part of this specific job, right? We have extremely bright students, and these students ask extremely complicated questions. And I would still say that reacting to these complicated questions in the environment of a lecture setting, I'm still doing a better job than artificial intelligence. I mean, maybe AI is going to prove me wrong in a couple of years, but what I'm trying to say is that the skills that are still left to me, kind of the human skills, resilience and agility, for example, when talking to my students, or team working when doing group exercises with them, I can now focus more on these human skills than on the technical skills that the AI is much better in completing than I am. And that's essentially the research question of this last work that I'd like to present here. It's like, does the rise of AI increase the demand for human skills? And when I talk about human skills, we selected a couple of skills based on various industry and academic reports, where people assumed, okay, those are probably the skills complementary to artificial intelligence that will be increasing in demand, simply because of this substitution effect, simply because AI is getting better in the technical things, in the writing the code and summarizing the texts or translating scripts. And we can focus more on the skills that are outlined via teamwork, ethics, technical proficiency, digital literacy, resilience, agility, self-efficiency, and analytical thinking. Just to clarify this, those are buckets of skills. So they're individual skills that we identified in job postings that are within each of these groups, but these are the main buckets that we'd like to look at. And in our work, we came up with two hypotheses, or we came up with two effects, how we think that artificial intelligence is going to influence this kind of complementarity. And we hypothesize an internal and an external complementarity. Let me try to loop you in on what I mean with this. So the internal complementarity is really happening within AI positions. Let's take the data scientists, undoubtedly a really true AI position, people working with artificial intelligence, clustering techniques, unsupervised machine learning and such. We assume that for professionals like the data scientists, it becomes more important now to focus on ethical skills because, for example, the more opaque AI models like large language models become, in the good old days, you could still look at a regression analysis and see how it got to a certain conclusion. With large language models, with deep learning, this is much more opaque. And so it's really important for data scientists to understand the ethical implications of this. Are there certain biases in the type of code? Does the model make some kind of opaque decision that might have big ethical implications, and I don't really get them because I don't really know anything about ethics? That's the one part. And the external part is something that is happening, and that's really important for this paper, that's happening outside of AI roles. So that's happening to jobs that are not required directly to program, develop, or maintain artificial intelligence. So let me give you an example. One of the external complementary effects is, for example, for HR managers. So HR managers who are now presented maybe from their data science team, they got a recommendation who to hire because the AI model suggested so. They still need to be able to have a certain technical proficiency, right? They still need to understand how does AI come to conclusions like this generally. Or similarly, on a regional level, for example, you could imagine that in certain regions, cities or areas where self-driving cars have become more and more prevalent, so another type of machine learning, of computer vision, AI technology, now authorities, people in regulatory bodies who are not designing AI, who are not maintaining AI, but they still need to understand the functionalities of self-driving cars because they are the people supposed to regulate traffic control and regulate these cars. And that's the two effects that we essentially looked at in this paper. So what we see for the internal effect is already really intriguing. Again, here, similar to one of the charts that I showed you earlier, we're looking at the odds that a certain role is asking for these human skills. And everything above the line, above the dotted line here at 1 means that when looking at an AI role, it is more likely to find any of these human skills than for the rest of the labor market, for all of the non-AI roles. And what we see here, looking at our 7 buckets of human-centric skills, of complementary skills, we see big level differences, first of all. So we see that, for example, for skills like technical proficiency, the level is really, really high. So it's more than almost 3 times as likely for an AI role to demand technical proficiency skills compared to the rest of the labor market. And at the very bottom, we see, for example, skills like ethics, where it is less likely, interestingly, for AI roles to demand this type of skills compared to the rest of the labor market. But what we also see is there's a lot of things happening in this chart, essentially. So for some of these skills, they are quite changing over time. If you look at ethics, for example, so ethics has been moving from something way below the even odds in 2018 to values that are almost on par. So if you read the numbers on the right-hand side, you see that 31% of AI roles demand ethics skills and 35% of all other roles demand ethics skills. So that's almost a 1-on-1 ratio, right? But interestingly, there are also some interesting cases like resilience and agility. That's the third value from the top. Here we see that it's actually twice as likely for AI roles to demand these resilience and agility complementary skills than for the rest of the labor market. That was something that was really surprising to us. And that's also a finding that is robust once we not only look at simple odds, but once we start building a parsimonious model, where we try to, again, explain the prevalence of certain skills with various characteristics, such as industry, occupational controls, region controls, years, seniority, blue collar, white collar jobs, educational attainment, and such. We still see that certain complementary skills are significantly more likely to be demanded together with AI roles. So for example, if we look at the data scientist again, this is just limiting our sample to the data scientist. We are looking at the prevalence that a certain skill actually occurs when controlling. So these coefficients are the result of a regression analysis where we control for all of these other characteristics that we mentioned. We see that, but for ethics skills, it is significantly more likely for AI roles to demand skills such as technical proficiency, but also self-efficiency, analytical thinking or resilience, and agility. And the interesting thing is, it is not only more likely for some of these skills, it's also more profitable to have these skills if you're a data scientist. So the offered wages, we also try to explain in the model. And we see that, for example, for ethics skills, which are actually not that prevalent among AI roles, but if they are being demanded, they are associated with a significantly higher wage premium. So what is this supposed to say? This is actually kind of, it seems counterintuitive at first, but I think it actually isn't. It essentially means that people still haven't gotten that data science roles need ethics skills. But for those people who want their data scientists to have ethics skills, the companies that want their data scientists to have ethics skills, they are willing to pay quite a significant premium for that. Because if you read this chart carefully, this means that controlling for anything else, education and seniority, data scientists who also come with ethics skills can earn up to 10% more than their counterparts in data science who do not have skills in ethics, for example. So finally, looking at the external effects, we also we wondered to what extent AI penetration, is increasing the demand for complementary skills or substitutable skills throughout the economy. And what we see indeed is in this chart is that the more AI penetrates various occupations, so all of these dots are occupations in the United States, so the higher the AI penetration is in a specific occupation, the higher the demand for complementary skills is, and the slightly lower the demand for substitutable skills is. So what this is showing you is that here we're looking at roles outside of artificial intelligence. So all of these dots are not representing the demand for AI roles. They are representing the demand for complementary skills and substitutable skills outside of AI roles. And we clearly see a spillover effect. And we also ran these models comparing not only occupations, industries, and regions, because we assumed spillover effects on all of these three different levels. We also ran them in 3 different countries. So we looked, in addition to the US, at the UK and Australia as well. And while we see somewhat a bit of a mixed picture for regional spillovers, we see clear spillovers for occupation levels and for industry levels. In that sense, it's confirming one of our hypotheses that the higher the penetration or the more AI penetrates certain industries and certain occupations in all of these economies, the more outside of artificial intelligence roles, the more the demand, the higher the demand for complementary skills, and the lower the demand for substitutable skills. And maybe to wrap this up, of course, people then are interested, so which of the two effects is bigger? Is it really true that people are going to be automated away, or is it rather that people will get new jobs, or that there's more demand because of this complementary effect? We ran this and tried to extrapolate this to the labor market based on our data, and we kind of see that actually, on average, there's a strong positive effect. So across all of these occupational groups, we see that the effect, the complementary effect, is significantly larger than the substitutable effect. It might not seem that way actually on this scale because it's a logarithmic scale. So those are steps from 10 to 100 to 1,000. But the increased demand that we could associate to more AI penetration for complementary roles is significantly higher than this decrease in the demand for substitutable skills across these occupational groups. So maybe just to wrap this up with an outlook. So we've been looking at the demand side of labor markets for quite a bit now, for the last 2 years of the SkillScale project. And of course, that's only one part of the labor market. To get a complete idea of the labor market, we would also love to see look at the supply side of the labor market as well. And so we are planning to start actually in a few weeks from now, run our first test surveys, which later on lead to a larger survey wave of workers, of a representative sample of workers in the UK and in the United States, asking them about their AI skills, asking about whether they had been doing reskilling in AI, whether they like to learn more AI, what are the bottlenecks to learning AI skills, whether they want to have a certificate for the AI skills they learn, whether they could learn them in school or in some online self-directed education via educational providers online, for example. And we hope to complete our picture looking at the supply side in addition to the demand side and actually see like, okay, what are the bottlenecks for learning AI skills and having AI skills and also evaluating AI skills. The evaluation of AI skills is really important in this survey on the worker side, on the supply side. We are, though, at a point where we haven't determined a name yet for this survey, and I'd love to invite you maybe for closing this again in a little survey. So we made three suggestions here, either sales, trail, or race, which were acronyms standing for the things that we'd like to do in this survey. And I'd be very happy to, I don't know, kind of invite you to a little poll and just put your favorite name in the chat. And yeah, other than that, I strongly invite you, so it's either sales, trail, or race, because I'm going to skip to the next slide in a bit. Other than that, if you'd like to know more about our group, visit skillscale.org. Feel free to scan the QR code. We did a little micro documentary just about a year ago on our work, and now I think I'm good on time, I hope, Volker, right? And I'm looking forward to maybe the next 15 minutes having a couple of question and answers on this. That was quite a rush through the through our latest findings, I reckon. Thank you.